Hello, everyone, and welcome back to They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann of law firm Alchemy. And boy, oh boy, am I delighted to talk to my guest today, which it's always funny doing these introductions because you, the listener, can see the name of the person in the episode name, yet I'm behaving right now as though you don't know who it is. Yet it's still important for me to give a fair introduction to him, especially because he's someone who I've known now for just about 13 years. Met him when I was working for Ben at Great Legal Marketing, one of those awesome introductions I was fortunate enough to have, and someone who has been a friend and mentor to me since then, runs an amazing organization, Business Black Ops. I highly recommend it. In addition to a fantastic law firm, he is an individual with quite a background that maybe we'll get into where we're legally allowed to get into it, and maybe we'll just leave it there. So I'm super excited to have my friend here, Dave Freeze. Dave, thanks for being on the podcast.
Excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm stoked. Okay, so Dave, what's the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
Well, I know you said it was supposed to be one thing, but there were two that were really traumatizing
That's okay.
to me. So the one I was good at, which is that they don't really teach you to be a good communicator. They teach you to be a good advocate. But the problem is this: to be a really good advocate, you have to know what the problem is from the perspective of the client. And it weirdly in law school, they do not teach you to do that. They teach you the Socratic method. They teach you to present in front of a jury, but they really don't teach you interhuman communication skills at an enhanced level. And what I find is the people that either by default or by accident or by design outside of law school become better at those skills are way, way, way better practitioners. And there's a related aspect to this, which is that they do not prepare you for the trauma or the marketing associated with practicing law. Everybody thinks, I got this degree, I'm going to come out, I'm going to go into a big law firm, they're going to hand me my cases, or I'm going to go out on my own, or I'm going to work for a judge, and it's going to be simple and easy. And it's none of those things. Now, great communication skills. Of course, I'm biased because I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out how human beings make decisions, both good and bad, and how to help them with that process and how to get information from them. But
which that last part, that's the alarming one. I hope everyone heard that, how to get information from them.
And I was trained as an interrogator, which before I went to law school, and that very much helped me in both law school and then with the trauma and marketing piece. So these two things, when you come out of law school, if you take your ethical obligations seriously, it is so much. It is so much responsibility that you take on your shoulders. And unless you have a really effective way of dealing with that stress, it's easy for anxiety to overwhelm people, because a lot of lawyers are creative in some aspect of their lives. And that creativity, a lot of them are really good problem solvers. And that creativity and being a good problem solver means that you're good at running scenarios. And when you're good at running scenarios, you keep running them and running them and running them until you get to the horrifying ones. And then that keeps you from sleeping. And then when you have lack of sleep, that anxiety builds up. So being able to be self-aware and communicate effectively with yourself, but also with prospects, like that's the other aspect of this that nobody teaches you. And I know you've dealt with this particular aspect of it hundreds of times on the show, but nobody teaches you how to take these legal skills and create a business around them, how to reach people. They just assume that by having the degree, they're going to be able to get the business. So there's three little problems there, but they all revolve around the same thing, which is that we are not taught how to be exceptional communicators with ourselves and other people. We're taught how to be advocates, and those are two different things.
So the thing that I really picked up on there, and you highlighted right at the end, Dave, was the communication, both external and internal. Now, I'm really curious about if we're going to improve our communications. It sounds perhaps like what we have is a chicken or the egg scenario. Do we fix the internal or the external first? In your experience, where does that journey best begin?
It best begins by fixing yourself. by becoming more aware. Like I say, awareness is key to being a good human being, but a good lawyer, and an effective human being and an effective lawyer. And there are two sides to that coin, as there are to almost everything in life. One is the self awareness, and the other is the situational awareness. But if we don't work on the self first, if we don't work on being able to process and communicate with ourselves and be aware of where our strengths and our weaknesses are, and be aware of our triggers and what happens when somebody activates one of them, and being able to notice that there's a pause between cause and effect where we can regain some semblance of control, not over the situation, but over ourselves. If we grapple with the self part, the internal part, the who we are and how we react and how we process, that makes us much more capable of then learning about our environment, paying more attention to what people not just are saying, but how they're acting when they're saying it, developing acuity of how people talk to us, and situational awareness of what's going on. But it seems like the chicken and the egg, but I'm convinced that if you don't get the self down first. Now listen, the perfect could be the enemy of any level of success.
Sure.
And none of us are ever going to be perfect, and we're all flawed, and we all carry around this weight of trauma that's happened to us at various points in our lives. And it's hard. Doing work on ourselves is hard. So we tend to turn away from it because it's hard. But we have to crack that egg, and we have to make some progress. So I'm not saying you got to spend years in therapy before you go out and notice how people are talking to you. I am saying that if I had to dedicate time early in my day, each day to something, it would be to getting better as me for a few weeks or a few months, and then taking the new, even slightly enhanced version of Dave out into the world and starting to learn the mindset of really great communicators, the strategies and the tactical things that they do.
So if we were to transform this a little bit into, say, a protocol, to use the Huberman Lab version of it all, if we were to transform that into a protocol, that self-work that you talked about over, say, a span of, let's give it 3 months, what might that look like?
Sure. And it's funny you mentioned Huberman. I was just listening to something. It was Ferris interviewing Huberman, and it just dropped. Yeah. And I heard Huberman say something that I had seen in an article that he wrote for Scientific American some time ago. And I noticed it and thought to myself, and this is all on the journey of self, I thought, this is an powerful insight. I should do something with this, and proceeded not to. But then when I heard him say it again, outside of the boring scientific paper, I realized that I should do something with this. And of course, we know, like probably everybody listening to this knows, that generally speaking, we don't have to think about breathing. It happens automatically.
Yes.
But if we do think about breathing, it is a gateway to changed internal states of self. So, like, for example, the fourfold breath, breathing in to a count of 4, holding to a count of 4, out to a count of 4, and holding the empty lung for a count of 4, and then repeating that. When you breathe that way, your brain goes, we're calm. This is a safe situation. Otherwise, I couldn't breathe like that. So when you breathe that way, it triggers all sorts of neurotransmitters in your body, and it bathes your brain in them that lets you become way better at things requiring you to be calm. So that's a two-way street. If we start huffing and breathing high up in our chest, our brain says the opposite. Oh, this has got to be a very dangerous situation. But we can learn to interrupt, or make it a practice, to your point, a protocol that either before we go to bed or early in the morning, it's generally best to do these things. We could do fourfold breathing or some other type of breathing technique that makes us feel particularly well and particularly safe. And that creates a different environment to do other work on ourselves. But what Huberman said was, and I'd read it in the paper, was that vision is the same, that our eyes are the only part of our brain that's been extruded out of the cranium, the skull, and they are nerves dangling out there, picking up all of these, this external information. But that vision can have the same effect. We don't generally think of controlling it consciously, but we could. So what he was explaining is if you go and you look out at a vista and you have panoramic vision, your brain does the same thing. It goes into a state of calm, collected, creative, iterative modality. It's like that panoramic vision creates a meditative state within us.
Mm.
And contrary to that, and I've talked about this at Business Black Ops, if you're in a gunfight, your vision contracts and you get a very narrow vision. And there are all kinds of good reasons for that. But when you have this narrow vision, it's triggering your brain and telling you that there's danger and that you have to be uber focused on what that danger might be. It causes us sometimes to miss all sorts of things that are going on in the practice of law and in life and with our partners and children and all these other things when we're looking down the straw too often. But he's right. You can, in your mind, create an opportunity to see in a much more panoramic sense. And so if we combine the ability to use vision and breathing consciously to create these deep, relaxed, meditative states where we're capable of observing our lives and our world and our problems and our anxiety from a different perspective, that could be really powerful. So what I do still to this day is a lot of what I did when I first was overcoming like some of this trauma, which is that I have a breathing practice that leads into my meditative practice. And I'm about to add, based on Huberman science, a way of using vision to sort of multiply the effect of that. And as you know, not everybody listening knows, I was trained at a very young age as a hypnotherapist by one of the world's great psychologists and psychiatrists, who is also the kind of the father of modern hypnosis by one or later more of his grad students. And then I got really enhanced training in that. So one of the things I've been working on is, can I give myself suggestions to open up that vision and to sense that calm and to notice it, and then to magnify it, and finding myself in a more relaxed state. This all relates to what I was saying to you about trauma and the practice of law.
Oh, yeah.
If you find yourself with that heart racing, change it immediately with the breathing. If you can think of compounding it with vision, all the better. But it just lets you see things from a new position. I will also add, and this is weird, I'm sure, in a, well, maybe not in an alchemical law practice podcast, but it's weird to be talking about all these ethereal things on a podcast like yours. But I do think that there is a place for really focusing on sleep, because that is another thing that I found when I came out of law school. Now law school was a different place when I went to law school like 172 years ago. But when I came out, I worked like an animal. I remember Robin was in a restaurant school training to be a chef. And at my firm, if you stayed past 8 o'clock at night, they would do your dry cleaning and give you the fare for a cab home, and you could buy dinner. And so I was like, what the heck? Robin's at restaurant school. I'm just going to stay. And I just worked around the clock. I slept very little in those days, did probably horrible damage to my mind and body. Lack of sleep was probably the least of the dangerous things that I did. But I would say that if you make part of your protocol and your routine to get regular sleep and get a little bit more of it than you think you need, it gives you that extra little bit of a foundation where these other things we're talking about, where breathing and meditation and vision and morning and evening sunlight. I will tell you this, that's another Huberman lab piece of research, where Huberman took a lot of research and made it accessible to human beings, people like you and me that don't do all the research ourselves. And looking at, you wouldn't know it from what you could see on screen, but I could see the Chesapeake from here, or a tributary of the Chesapeake. And I'm in this big open farm area. My front yard is looks like a giant lake. It's a stream that leads right into the Chesapeake. And so it's easy for me to see super early morning light, because I'm a very early riser. And I have a puppy, so I'm involuntarily an even earlier riser now.
A great and terrible decision at the same time.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But Tucker Max, we lost Tucker Max.
Yeah.
So the tax you have to pay for the amazing experience you have with dogs is that you lose them. Although he got to 15. Yeah. So he was a trooper. But as far as the protocol goes, I would focus on sleep, getting a little bit more of it and making it deeper. And there's all kinds of good resources on that. I would focus on having some kind of prayer or meditative practice or both. And I would get ready for those by using these two techniques of vision and breathing that we've been talking about, which just leads you, it just leads your body right and your mind right into that place where you could just sit for a few minutes. And like I said, you don't need to be perfect at all this before you get perfect at noticing what other people are thinking and doing and what's going on around you. But anything you do can lead to progress. I do think you're right to call it a protocol, because I think consistency for a month or two makes it way more likely that you're just going to make that part of your life.
The overwhelming majority of what I work on with coaching clients is, we'll just use the term habits.
Yeah.
Because those habits spread out over a long enough duration of time, which most people are resistant to long durations of time, except when it's an excuse to put something off. Then they're happy with a long duration of time. But most people are afraid of, I will actually do that thing for the next 10 years consistently. And they get to 10 days and they drop it, frankly, which is, if that's our threshold with most people, you want to get success, do things that most people won't do over a longer duration of time than anyone else would do it.
Yeah.
There we go. So the next level then goes into the external communication. Now, what I see in between those points, we've done some of the internal work. We've started a self-development process. We've started to become a new person. And this actually, by the way, I'm going to do a quick interlude here regarding you, Dave. And it's about finding people in your life who will enable this next step of being able to take the internal work and externalize it, which is that one of the things I have seen you be gracious about with myself, but with so many people in business black ops, is letting the people around you become the new versions of themselves and not holding on to the old version of themselves and kind of waiting for them to fall back into it. You don't ever exhibit that behavior. So actually, before we go on to external communication, I'm curious about, one, why is that with you? And two, how can people bring more of those folks into their life?
So it's a really exceptional question, and I have a really good answer. Like, that's a complicated question, but I attribute that aspect of my personality, which is I want people to be more of who they want to be and that they're capable of being. And they've probably been holding themselves back. Everybody tries to blame the environment and that they're not making enough money. But my ability to do that, in fact, my desire to see that happen, to see them become who they can be, really comes from something that happened when I was 16 years old. I was chafing at the public school education in a little town in Pennsylvania. And I left home and I went as a Rotary Exchange student to New Zealand. But this was like the most incredible model for me later in life, because I had the opportunity to start all over again, to change who I was when I went there. Those people didn't know the Dave Freeze before. And people used to tell me all the time, you can't change. I assure you, you can change. There may be some ingrained behaviors that are hard to change. And there may be some things coming from trauma that are just like so actively triggered that you're skipping past that pause between cause and effect. You're just like ignoring it.
Right.
Sure. But if you really put your mind to it, and to your point, make it a habit and create a protocol around it and find ways to enjoy the change and what's going to come from that, and have the resiliency, if the change that you want doesn't happen instantaneously, to just try other things until it does. So when I left, I was a new person when I landed in New Zealand. And then when I came back to the United States 2 years later, I was a totally new person. People didn't even recognize me. People I went to school with were like, who are you? And so that made me realize that change is entirely possible. I was a fat, ornery, difficult kid who knew he was smart, but was overly happy to tell other people that not only he was, but that they weren't as smart as him. That's kind of a recipe for people wanting to beat you up and throw you into your locker. And not that any of that ever happened. Um, and when I came back, I had dedicated like my whole life to being this new, better version of myself. So I feel like I'm a catalyst. That's all I am. I'm not trying to tell people who to become. I'm not trying to tell people. I will tell them, hey, there's some skills that are almost universally helpful, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
really good at them, and I'll show them to you if you want to see them. But I'm not going to force you, to do anything you don't want to do. Well, I have done that in the past, but generally speaking, I like to get people to the point where they recognize why they should cooperate with me for their own
Well
good.
phrased.
Yeah. But it was interrogation. I always was the good guy. In fact, I got recruited to do a project because my overlords called me one day and said, hey, this guy that you interrogated wants to help, but he'll only do it if he's talking to you. And he's like, we
Aw.
don't usually get callbacks like that.
It's very sweet. It's very sweet in that world. I like that. Okay, so that's phenomenal. I really did want to highlight that point before we talk about the external, because there is a hiccup point that happens in there,
Yeah.
which is the moment of the plan, the internal work, now becoming the plan, which is now about to head out onto the battlefield, where
Mm-hmm.
circumstances are
To
not
encounter
always.
others.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Who have thoughts, opinions. They want you to be your old self, for example. So, in practicing taking that internal to the external, how can people push that forward and see
Yeah.
success in that?
Yeah. So because we're in a confined sort of time frame here, I'm gonna 80-20 this. I'm gonna 98 to it. I'm gonna give you your folks listening the 2%, like a couple of techniques that they could do. Because when you
Awesome.
go out into the battlefield, before when you're working on you, you're in control.
Mm-hmm.
If stuff spirals out of control, it's your responsibility. But when you go out and you're influencing other people and you're persuading other people and you're trying to find out what other people want and you're trying to build marketing around solving a problem for them and curing their fears and anxieties, other people are involved. And so you really have to become way better at one, making them know and like and trust you. Because if
Mm-hmm.
they know you, they'll be more willing to communicate. If they like you, that goes way up, and you're going to be able to get a lot more information, which in turn, you should be motivated by using that information to really help them. And then if they trust you, that just expands the speed of all transactions because trust means that that exchange of vital information goes so much faster.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you techniques that really go to the know, like, trust. In fact, I was one time talking to a former CIA agent at this point, and he goes, I know you and I like you, but I don't trust you. And I laughed out loud because in CIA, they teach you if you go from know to like too fast, you got to put on the brakes because they're going to take you to trust if they're manipulating you. To
Mm.
which I say the following, Charlie: all human communication is manipulation. So if somebody says you're manipulating me, which if I teach you these things, they will not do. But if they did, that's okay. Because if I tell you a joke, I want to make you laugh. If I tell you a story, I might want you to think about a particular thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of manipulation built into every type of human communication. So what matters is what's the intent behind the communication slash manipulation. So I'm going to give you your guys and gals some. I know you're not supposed to say that anymore, but I'm going to give them some really powerful techniques that they can just start doing, and they'll feel it right away. Because you want people to know you, to like you, to trust you, and therefore to be
Mm-hmm.
more free with exchanging information. Because
Mm.
ultimately, if you want to help yourself by building a really good marketing system for your firm, you have to know who are they, what are they afraid of? What are they worried about? What creates anxiety for them? What are their problems? What are their problems that if they don't pay you, they're crazy because it makes their life so miserable or is super costly? And when you get that from people, you might say, well, that's selfish, but it's not, because if you build something of such enormous value for them in a product or a service or a bundle of legal services, whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
if you build that and you give it to them, like I have people call me and compliment me and email me and compliment me on the newsletter that we send them. It's a hard copy newsletter. But think about it. I mean, we're just doing that to make them feel better, to help them with the problems, to teach them new cocktail recipes. We bribe them to read the other boring legal stuff.
Well done.
But and barbecue recipes during barbecue season. But the point is that if you really want to enrich yourself, the only way to do that is by making the decision to hire you and to pay you money for legal services, in this case, is like inevitable for them. And that they are so happy to pay you the money. Now, will everybody be happy? No, because money's got a lot of baggage around it. But if you can create a practice where most people that are paying you are like, oh, thank God I paid that much money for that. I feel better already. That's the thing. So one of the best ways to do that, I will tell you a story. I went to a new doctor one time. I don't go to the doctor very often, but this was a functional.
Dave, can I be honest? It took me a moment to translate the word new for a second. I thought you said a nude doctor, and I was prepared to just take that in stride. I'll be honest.
That was good because I love the pattern interrupt too. And now you've made me see that, and I can't unsee it.
So you're going to see a new doctor.
Most of my doctors throughout my life have been women, which if I were to imagine them nude would be okay, at least for me. But well, I can think of one exception. But this guy is a weightlifter but a man. So, not just
do with it what you will.
Yeah, exactly. So I went to this doc, and first of all, he spent 45 minutes with me. And that was like the longest doctor's appointment I'd ever had since my spinal cord injury. And it was very interesting because he used my own techniques on me. And I was like, I know what he's doing, but I can't resist. But everybody listening should be doing this, which is, he came in, he said, Dave. So he calls me by my first name, like him immediately. He smiles, clearly manipulating me, and says, I'm just curious. So he's taken away all judgment. He's not judging. I'm just curious, like, why'd you come to see me today? And I answer him. But I am fond of saying to people, the first answer that anyone gives you is always a lie.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense, at least, that it's not the full truth.
Right.
They're telling you the story that they were prepared to tell you. So he goes, yeah, that makes sense. Sure. And what else? So now I'm like, he's getting deeper. So I tell him. And he goes, I totally understand that too. And so now we're going to the third level. He's peeling back the onion. Well, you can imagine that I am, and he makes you, by his demeanor and his gesture and his tone of voice and his facial expression, he makes you want to tell him. Mm-hmm. So you do. Now, he probably went on with this, and it was remarkable that I even noticed, because that's a hard technique to pick up on if you do it naturally. But even though I noticed, I still answered him, because about the sixth point where he goes, sure, just leaves it out there. About 2 seconds in, no one can stop themselves anymore. They just answer again. So I ask you this: if the doctor who comes in and just asks, "Why are you here?" is that doctor better informed than this doctor who asked me all these questions? No, this guy got way, wearing clothes or not, way more information. Way more information.
I was wondering which one of us was going to get to the nudity callback reference sooner. Congratulations, right. You won that battle.
But I guess if I had to pick any one technique to teach someone first, that would be it. Because to your point, what are the things that we could do it's strengthening our acuity. It's making people know, like, and trust us more. And you may say, well, how? It seems like he's being nosy, but it didn't seem like that. It seemed like he took genuine, deeper interest in me. And what do we like? What does our brain like? It likes when people take a genuine, deeper, more profound interest in us. So it makes us feel, I know this guy now. It's Dr. So-and-so. I like him. He smiled at me, called me by my shortened version of my first name when I came in, which is fine with me. It might have been better if he said, do you prefer Dave or David? It doesn't matter in my case, but some people get all freaked out about it. He shoots me a smile, so I know him. I like him. And now I trust him because he's taken this deep and profound interest in me. And Charlie, I want to be respectful of your time. I love spending time with you, and I have as much time as you need. But I'm not mucking you up, am I?
Absolutely not.
Right.
I would cut you short. Don't worry. If I need to, I'll cut you short. The screen
would just go dark.
That's right. Just go completely black. No, not in the least, my goodness. No. Okay. So we start to develop this external facing exercise, this not just secondary but tertiary level of curiosity with people to
Hmm.
develop know, like, and trust. From there, in order to expand our portfolio, or actually, you know what, Dave, I really know where this should go. So ignore what I was just the road we were just going down, because it popped into my mind, because what we've started to develop here is a feedback loop. And that's something I've heard you speak on many times, the
Hmm.
OODA loop. And
Hmm.
I would really love for everyone listening to this to at least get a first point of installation of the OODA loop in their
Yeah.
lives. So can you explain that?
Well, it's so funny. It's the next thing that I wanted to talk about if you had the time. So that was
There we
perfect, right on the
go.
nose.
And by the way, folks, that was not at all planned. I'm sure that Dave somehow put this in my subconscious several years ago, leading to this moment. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
So the idea of a feedback loop, everybody's brain goes, yeah, 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 I get feedback and I react to it. But the truth is most people don't, because they're not really watching the world in any meaningful way. They're so self-absorbed and running bad patterns rather than good patterns, which we've already
Mm-hmm.
talked about fixing. But the OODA loop was made a foundational change in my life and in my practice when it dawned on me, like, hey, why not use it in the marketing of your practice? Why not use it in client retention in your practice? Why not use
Mm-hmm.
it when you're recruiting? So let's talk about it. The OODA loop was developed by Colonel Boyd as a tool to help people to understand fighter pilots fighting Russian MiGs. And the idea was this: you observe, you orient, you decide, and then you take an action. But it doesn't end there. That looks like a circle. This goes sort of concentrically around and around, because the idea was if you could run the OODA loop faster than the MiG pilot, you would win the dog fight.
Mm.
And it's kind of the same in the world, too. If you can run the OODA loop faster than your competition, or in a better, more fluid, more effective way than somebody else, you're going to end up winning the situation or advancing significantly, to your point. And here's why: you observe, you look around, and you see what's what. You orient, you pick out your choices. Like, here are a number of them. Here's where most people don't do any of this, but here's where most people get fouled up. They don't have any choices because they're unaware. And then when they become
Uh,
aware and become iterative, they have a billion choices and they just pick one, not the
uh-huh.
one in the most important area of their business, not the one that will make the biggest difference in the shortest period of time, not the one that will alleviate a pain that's radiating out and causing all sorts of trouble. So you observe, you orient, you make a decision based on prioritization. And we can talk about that. Like, how do you pick the next best thing consistently to be ready to do and then to pull the trigger on it?
Mm-hmm.
And they decide and then they act. Now, what happens is that the action changes the battle space. So, like, let's apply this to marketing. You
Yeah.
observe what the people coming to you. You go, I don't like those people because they cause all of the problems. I'm not well suited for the kind of work they're asking me to do. They are rude to my staff, all these things. So I don't want them, but I love doing this kind of work for this kind of person who, by the way, really has a big problem that I solve for them, and it's highly remunerative. So I'm going to do that one, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I observe, I orient, I pick out my choices, I decide that I'm going to reach that person by creating a podcast, or I'm going to reach that person by writing a
Right.
series of blog articles on a topic that's super important to them. And then I act. Now, what I always do now is when I make the decision to run the OODA loop to do anything, I always allow time to go back, either a day if it's email, or a month if it's a direct mail piece, to go back and
Yeah.
look and say, did the decision that I made have the requisite effect? So that implies that you want to be thoughtful enough when you decide that you have KPIs or some way of measuring. Because if you have no way of measuring whether it was doing what it was supposed to do, I have lawyers tell me all the time, oh, yeah, we are spending money promoting this type of practice. And then when we look at it, it's their least remunerative practice and something that they're moderately good at and don't even really. So
Of
they could be
course.
taking their money and spending it to promote something that they're really good at, that they really enjoy, and that's got a higher margin, but they don't do that. So when we decide and we act, then we want to go back later and run the loop again, right? See, how did the thing change? how did the world change? Did more of those people we want to come see us? Did they pay us? Or did the place where we put this article, like on the blog or on somebody else's blog, did it bring in horrible people that we really didn't enjoy working for? Not that there's that many horrible people out there, but there are a few. There are a few. I've run into a few of them. And some beautiful people think I'm a horrible person. It's totally understandable. But the idea of running the OODA loop in all these different areas of your practice and life, the review time needn't be necessarily hours or days. It could be that I'm going to go back and take a look at these statistics for at least 15 minutes in a week or so to see, is it working? Should we do something more? And I have another technique. You've seen it, I think, called what's working and what's not. It's a 4-step process rather than 2. You identify, just inventory all the things that are actually working in your practice. Oh, we like this intake process. Oh, we like this script. Oh, this thing is working. That thing's working. Then the next thing, well, because that gives you dopamine. You're coming up with all these things.
Lovely dopamine.
So it makes you feel a little better when you get to the next part, which is what's not working. What are all these problems? This is a really great prioritization technique. And then and only then are you going to go back and say, okay, of the things that aren't working, which should we eliminate? Which should we try to optimize first? How are we going to do that? And then, and only then, after you've picked 1 or 2 of those to work on, do you go back and go, of what's working, where do we do more of it? I'll give you an example. Like our newsletter is killer good and it brings in tons of clients. It's a direct mail piece and it's designed to bring back in waves of clients from a very big client pool. And it does. So should we do that? That's on the estate planning side. Should we do that on the estate administration side? That's harder. Should we do it on the elder law? Well, maybe not. Maybe it doesn't work as well there, but it's at least worth testing. Should we do more of it? Instead of doing it 4 times a year, should we do it 8 times a year where we do it? There's reasons why we don't, but hopefully that's not just a story we're telling ourselves, but our bottleneck is the number of attorneys and staff. Like if we did that newsletter again, we could conceivably be picking the low-hanging fruit all the time and overwhelm the system. So
right.
So the good thing about OODA Loop, though, and the good thing about what's working and what's not, is it helps us to be more aware of ourselves. It helps us to be more aware of what's going on. And it helps us to be more aware of what's really working and what's really not, and therefore better able to prioritize what we should do, what we should make a real priority to fix or to enhance.
And I'll say, having spent time within the world of Dave and business black ops, that I can see a lot of people who put that OODA Loop system to use in all aspects of their lives. It's a potent force in personal relationships as well. I just like to highlight that for all of the law firm owners who, look, it can be running a business in general. It can be stressful and that can put strain on a relationship. You wrote a whole book about the language of parenting. That's the title as well. I recommend it to everyone.
Well,
and there is that point of like seeing the effect of what you're doing and using that feedback loop in order to improve the outcome. I mean, there's been quoted many times, the quality of your outcome is determined by the quality of your questions. That is a potent force in your life. The information that you gather as you observe, as you orient yourself, makes a huge, huge difference. So Dave, before I ask the final question here, which is a very simple.
You didn't tell me what this is going to be, so my heart's racing.
That's okay. I promise it will be entirely not stressful, especially for someone like you. But before we do that question, if people are interested in learning more about you, about business black ops, just connecting with you in general, where should we send them to?
Yeah, so we should start, I guess, by you and I both saying, well, hopefully you feel this way, the Business Black Ops is not some nefarious organization, but rather it's dedicated to bringing ideas that I have. So the tools of spies, interrogators, and special forces operators. We've had Jocko as a speaker. I don't know if you were there that year or not, but
unfortunately, no.
We've had spies. So these are all, how do we amplify what we're already doing? And there are a bunch of techniques we learn at the meta level, which is the mindset. How do we become more resilient? How do we become more curious? How do we become more creative? all of the things that great people train their minds to do. And then there are strategic force multipliers. And so I like to say that the mindset force multipliers are how we think about thinking. We be better and more thoughtful about how we think. And then the strategic force multipliers are thinking about doing. We pause and we think about what we're going to do so that we do the most important things. And the next thing that we do is the next great thing. And then the tactical force multipliers are what are little techniques that we can teach people that they could do that change their marketing or improve their intake or all of those kinds of things that you're always doing for people. And, but to your point, I try to pick things and show things and teach things and model things and bring in speakers that talk about things that we could use in business and in life too, that have that dual purpose. So if anybody wants to know more about that ever, they should tell us that they came from you, and they should call Lisa Snyder at 610-933-8069, or they can email me. But we're about to launch. It should be any moment. It's due. It was supposed to be done in Q3 of this year, but it's going to launch in Q1. There's going to be a Business Black Ops website. There already is a very sophisticated membership site for people that are members.
Yes.
But this one's going to be just stuff up front that you could go and learn, and really cool blog content. So, and we've got some guest blog writers that'll blow you away too. So as soon as I'll send you that, so you can go and play around on it anytime you want to and share it.
Perfect.
Perfect.
I do encourage people to go take a look at Business Black Ops. It is an informative but also fun and collaborative community.
Thank you. That's what we're shooting for.
Really cool people. Yeah, really cool people in there.
And they love you, Charlie. There's a lot of lawyers there, so of course they love you. But they do. There was because you couldn't make it. You had a program where you were speaking, and so Charlie couldn't make it to our last event, and he was very much missed. It was the talk of the town.
Well, I missed being there. I look forward to being there in 2024 for sure. Carving that out on my calendar. That's the luxury of now being the head honcho in the business. I get to pick and choose.
Yeah.
All right, Dave. Final question for you.
Yes, final question.
What are you reading, watching, and listening to these days?
Ooh, this is a good one. So because I admitted it, that I was listening to Ferriss interview Huberman.
Yes.
I am a fan of the Huberman Lab. I am a fan of Lex Fridman if we're on the listening part. Well, I guess you could watch those too. So Lex Fridman, Ferriss, and Huberman are the three podcasts that I regularly listen to. Reading, I shared some of what I often read with you, which is I think I got you the Farnham Street collection of mental models.
I can see them from where I am right now.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice. So I'm constantly reading about that. I strongly recommend Charlie Munger, who just passed recently.
Yes.
But there are a couple of exceptional Charlie Munger books, including Charlie Munger's Almanac. And
phenomenal.
Charlie is an advocate of a mental model called inversion thinking, which is people always try to think like, what would I need to do to become rich? And Charlie's view was, well, you can and probably should do all those things, but you should invert it and say, what do people do that never get rich, that keep them from getting rich? And that when you combine those two, the sort of strategic thinking and inversion thinking about things, you are able to avoid the things that would threaten your ability to achieve a particular goal too. So I'm a big fan of Charlie Munger, and I'm a big fan of reading about mental models. But asking me what I'm reading, do you mind if I just step away for 1 second just to show you the magnitude of the question you're asking?
Yes. I fully expected it to be, more of like a full-on listicle than just here's what I've got in my pocket these days.
So this is sort of my bedside reading, and I'm one of those psychopaths.
Yep, that's about right. Yep.
Yeah,
literally an armful of books.
Yeah, and I read like multiple books at the same time, but I have been a big fan recently of Ryan Holiday.
That's great.
I've always been. I know Ryan. I've met Ryan. I've been a fan of his, but I've been reading them. I have not read Ray Dalio's new book, But here's the reason that I like to read different things at the same time, because they will inform one another. Like I
Uh,
have Marshall Goldsmith's Triggers book here. And when I read it, it started to get me thinking about how does this way of looking at the world make me think about these other books that I'm reading?
hmm.
So I often find that reading a work that by an exceptional author helps me get more out of books that have, like a couple of tidbits or things in them.
Yeah.
But to our other point, I wanted to show you this. I'm always working on the brain too. So I'm reading Cool Mind
Oh,
and Five True Things. So look,
I can tell you right now that there are people who are actively furious that you named that many books, because there are people who devotedly buy the books that people talk about on this show. Like, Dave, you just destroyed my bedside table
I'm
with those
so sorry.
recommendations.
I'm so sorry.
And what about watching? Are you watching anything interesting these days?
Yes. I don't watch much TV, but
Mm-hmm.
Robin got me to watch Lessons in Chemistry, which is really awesome. She read the book, and then we watched the show, which is I watched it on Apple Plus. But it is the story of a woman in the 50s who fails to get her PhD for some horrible reasons, and then what her life looks like and the trajectory of her life after that. And it's fascinating, and it makes us think without. I guess it beats us in the head with some of the social issues,
It's
but
okay.
it's so well done that you don't mind it. You don't mind the vicious beating in the head. Um, and I love period pieces, so that was
Yeah,
just really good. Yeah.
love it. Well, Dave, I so appreciate your time, your wisdom, your insight, and all the good stuff on the show today. Thank you for being here with me, my friend.
Thank you so much.
And we will see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.